Okay, I'm calling the meeting to order. And do we have everybody on? And we'll see if there are any participants that members of the audience that want to bring up any item that is not already on the agenda for this evening. Any item on the agenda, there will be time to ask questions or make comments in regard to that later. Do we have any hands up?
Yes. Roger Sullivan.
Oh, sorry, we just came on it just came on really quickly. I think we got cut off from the first bit. Are you asking for comments now or are you going to have them later?
So this is public comments for items not on the agenda.
Yeah, I think maybe that you were switched off for a while there because Mr. Bundy just came on and I think we were missing something.
No, well,
yeah, so maybe if you could tell us what items were on the agenda.
Well, the item on the agenda that's going to be the main topic of conversation is the climate adaptive plan. And that will be discussed as part of the agenda, and there would be time for comments in regard to that.
All right, thank you.
Do we know if there are any hands up for anything that is not on the agenda as published?
No hands raised.
Okay. So what I discussed was changing the agenda so that the climate adaptive plan can be first on the agenda for any members of the audience that wish to ask questions or comment in regard to that. And so, RJ, I would turn it over to you and ask you to give us an update on what's been happening in regard to the climate adaptive plan and the comments that you had received from the meeting on the Wednesday the 3rd.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a brief presentation, and we also have Sasha Peterson from Adaptation International here with us today, as well as Chris Good, our senior civil engineer for the town of Corte Madera. And Chris, are you able to display the slideshow, or do you want me to pull that up?
Yeah, let me pull that up right now. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. I just need to. Okay.
You go to slide 4, please, Chris.
Yeah.
So many of you may have seen today, our town manager, Todd Cusimano, released a statement. We've received an immense amount of comments, not just last week, but really dating back to right around the holidays. And some common areas that we're hearing from the public and really want to touch on that. The high level point is we fully intend to update the document in a significant way. We're getting a lot of comments regarding section 3, which is the shoreline section, and really kind of, taking it back. And even though we had developed some possible strategies, really just keeping it more general, knowing that should the community be interested in pursuing any sort of project that might provide some benefits to protection of Mariner Cove, Marina Village, Mariner Cove, that we would really just restart and open the door and really reconsider all options. Starting back at the intent of this climate adaptation plan, we received a $200,000 grant from Caltrans to assess the town's vulnerabilities to climate change. And our goal as town staff has been, how can we identify our vulnerabilities and do our best to protect our residents and their property from adverse effects of climate change. We did receive comments that people felt like that wasn't the way that the document read. And so again, we're taking very close consideration of those. Next slide, please. So specifically, we received a lot of criticism about some of the specificity and some of the language regarding these items. So retreat, levee, seawall, and floodgate, some of these potential disclosures for real estate transactions, the potential for a policy regarding constraints on redevelopment, and also a connection or a tie to this. It's this larger effort that's meant to amend the town's hazard mitigation plan, and that's just not the case. So really, again, we're taking a step back. We're going to update the document significantly, and that's something that staff will need to spend a lot of time over the next couple weeks, along with our project team, really dissecting that language and really trying to update it so it reflects the desires of the community. Next slide, please. So, with respect to Marina Village, Mariner Cove, we still do think the next step in the process would be a more robust alternative analysis process. It would basically be a fresh start. We could look at any and all alternatives. That would go with an engineering effort, environmental analysis, significant public engagement. This is a big effort. It's likely 2 to 3 years, 4+ community workshops. And I've estimated the cost in the $500,000 to $800,000 range. To give you a sense of that level of effort, the cap as a whole was about $400K. So, and took about 2 years. So, 2 to 3 times larger to really fully understand the options for Marina Village, Mariner Cove, and that could be an infrastructure improvement. It also could be, we've heard some people that want to know project alternatives. So that would be one consideration. Town staff has kind of taken a step back, and we thought, through the first 18 months of the cap, that it was heavily supported and near unanimous support for an analysis of that level. But in the recent month or two, that's been questioned. And so we're really going to try to go out to the community and really see what level of support we have. Right now, it's not as clear as it once was months ago. But in any way, we're not trying to force a project, build something that the community is not supportive of. That's just not our goal as public servants to the community. So, so really, that's been the message today, and happy to get your thoughts on this idea, this process. Also happy to take in additional comments on the draft cap itself. Although, as mentioned, we've heard quite a bit of those, and we'll be diving into those in more detail over the coming weeks. Next slide, please. So from there, it's I'll open it up. It really, any comments you want to provide on the draft climate adaptation plan, any questions you have on any of the work done to date, any questions on the overall cap process, we're happy to touch on to the extent it's appropriate for where we are in this process.
So RJ, who is controlling the hand analysis for people with raised hands?
Yeah, so Chris, let's back out of the slideshow, and then Chris and I will be calling on folks. So far, we have 2 hands up, and so if you're ready, I can call on them.
I was going to see if the board members want to make any comment in regard to, this latest message from Todd and your explanation of it. I did want to make a comment, having followed this from the beginning and being involved on the flood board for at least 15 years now, and having attended a number of conferences in the Bay Area, the North Bay Watershed Association, as well as a number of regional conferences. And I was really pleased that the town had been proactive in looking at future problems that we potentially can experience and find ways to resolve those. I'm also pleased that you're going beyond, what we did with this really excellent group of consultants that we had that analyzed the problems and looked at it. And I think this is just a really good basis for going forward. Other communities are not doing that. They're just not at the point where, they themselves are looking at what the risks are to themselves. And I know that the consultants took in the Marin County Bay Wave and analysis in looking at all of this. So I think we have a really great basis and information for going forward. And I congratulate the town for setting this up and having the consultants that we had look at our problems. Are there any other board members that want to comment on the CAP?
I'm not sure if I have to raise my hand, Bob, but raise my hand.
Oh,
How are you? RJ, I got a question about the some of the comments you made as we introed into this subject. And you had suggested there's a lot of town feedback you've received in the last few months. Can you educate the board a little bit on what you're seeing in terms of the percentage of the comments that believe there should be no plan of action versus the percentage that think there should be some alternative plan of action? And with respect to those that don't think a plan of action should be done, is it your feel that that is a group of people that feel there is no threat to flooding in Mariner Cove and the neighboring communities?
Yeah. I can't, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but yeah, there's a dozen or so comments, possibly more, that have questioned some of the possible strategies, and in particular, the various alignments, the height of those alignments, but also built in there, I think there's also a disconnect, and maybe it's been clarified more recently, but initially, comments like, oh, you're proposing a 15-foot levee or sheet pile wall. And it, again, the draft climate adaptation plan talked about building a wall up to a 15-foot elevation, which is different than a 15-foot wall when the ground itself is at 7 to 8 feet elevation in general. So there was some information that, we felt wasn't fully understood by some of these groups. And then separately, there are some folks that are questioning the sea level rise concepts in general. I don't know that they completely disagree that sea level rise is a thing, but I don't think they believe it's gonna occur at the rate at which many of these models are suggesting. So there's just kind of two parts to that response, but like I said, a dozen or so comments on those lines. There also was a survey that was conducted through online, and there may have been a lot more through kind of a multiple choice response, and we'd have to identify those and really give you a more accurate number on the exact folks that clicked on that.
Thank you.
other board members?
David here. I'll make a brief statement. I really think we should have most time for our attendees. So I live in Marina Village, and I'm very close to an existing levee. So I have both personal reasons and also views as a representative, a member of the flood board. I think the general theme is my neighbors felt that this was being rushed. They didn't understand the urgency. They may or may not believe in sea level rise or the need for a levee system, but they just did not understand the urgency of adopting the cap and what it implied. So I agree that the cap is a great technical beginning, but on the other hand, I think it's been a good step for the town to step back and take more time. That's my statement.
Okay, any other flood board members that want to ask a question of RJ or make a comment in regard to CAP? So RJ, do you want to go ahead and allow some participants to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So firsthand I'm seeing is Roger Sullivan. And Roger, you should be able to speak now. Given the number of folks on here, Bob, how much time would you like to offer up? We have
Well,
about
I would
5
go
minutes.
beyond, I won't hold to a strict 3 minutes on that. I would ask people to stay on topic and to be focused and not necessarily repeat what others have said. But I will be a little bit looser in regard to the time.
Okay, we'll set a 3-minute timer, but knowing that we can go a little over if needed. So Chris, if you can just let us know when we hit 3 minutes.
Sure.
Roger, when you're ready.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the town's response in reconsidering aspects of the CAP, given, following our last meeting. I think sure everyone's very grateful for that flexibility. I want to quickly respond to Brian, who asked whether, there are many people who are just denying the need for any sort of plan. I think that it was often cast as a dichotomy between the town's CAP plan or nothing. And I've talked to many people in the community and not a single person sees it that way. There's not a single person I've spoken to that thinks that we don't have to address rising sea levels. So I hope that goes somewhere towards addressing your question. The point I might want to make is to build on the point that I made in the previous meeting, and that is that the CAP as it stood was based on projections of a 6-foot sea level rise by 2100, and that was based on the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2018, which again I have in front of me here. Again, the point for me is that the State of California recommends that the likely range for sea level rise by 2100, that's 80 years from now, is in the range of 1 foot to 3.4 feet, depending on the rate of change in emissions over the next 80 years. Yeah. Now, the CAP was based, as I said, on 6 feet, and in the California plan for 2100, that comes in at the 1 in 200 chance of occurring in the next 80 years. So in effect, the CAP as it was, the whole plan for the seashore was based on a 1 in 200 chance, or 0.5% of 6-foot sea rise in the next 80 years. So my question for the board is, Manager Cusimano in his message today said that the new plan is based on a more robust analysis on shoreline concepts. So I think the most pressing question is this new plan going to be based on the most likely range recommended by the state of California, or is it still going to persist with the 1 in 200 chance or the 0.5% probability of a 6-foot sea rise in the next 80 years?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So the reality is it's undecided. So as part of that alternatives analysis process, and again, we're taking a step back from that as well. We want to make sure that we have community support to invest, that $500,000 to $800,000 to proceed with that detailed analysis. And so that's kind of going to be the first step. And then if we do, and that moves forward, those are all things we're happy to discuss. Which model makes the most sense for the town of Corte Madera to use as they plan ahead. So, we through the process of the last, 2 years, we thought we had everyone kind of in agreement on which model to use. But again, we can open that up and further discuss in the near future should that new process start.
So RJ, one of the comments that I would have is that I've seen a lot of different scenarios over the past few years, and 6 foot was more of the upper limit, but I don't think I had seen anything that said less than 3 foot. So this Cal Plan 2100 is of interest to me. But I think we sort of want to plan for the worst case scenario, but as the decades passed, we'll get an idea of which projection is the right projection and whether we're able to get a hold of greenhouse gases and reverse some of the global warming and sea level rise. But we don't have to, build an 8 foot wall in somebody's backyard for something that's going to happen 80 years, or could happen 80 years from now. We need to do what a lot of neighbors have done, which is berm up in their backyards to prevent flooding that we're experiencing now. And I particularly look at the area on Golden Hind Passage around the sanitary pump station that we really need to work with the neighbors on to see what we can do to prevent problems that are happening there now. Are there any other board members that want to respond on that? Let's go on to the next question.
If I may, I'd like to add to that. So to your point, and I just want to elaborate on it. So as part of that next process, we might find out that grant funds are available if you protect to a certain level, whereas they aren't if it's a lower level. We might find out that certain types of treatments are considered FEMA certified or not. And there might be benefits. There might be a scenario where it affects grant funds, or maybe affects who has to pay flood insurance. And so those are a lot of unknowns that carry pros, cons, trade-offs that should really go into that conversation.
Get the next raised hand.
All right. Kay Hoffman.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks, RJ. So I sent my comments in before I got Todd's message, which was about an hour later, and I think it's great that you guys are reconsidering. I did not get my key question answered, which is about the runoff and the saturation of the soils, which is our key concern. I mean, all of us who are in Golden Hind, yes, we have king tides, we know what that looks like, but the flooding of the cove after it was rebuilt was a function of runoff and no place for that water to go, right? So as I wrote in my notes and my comments, and I have never gotten the answer, I have a pump station right next to my house. It does no good in high runoff. What are our plans and what is the strategy when the key issue for flooding is high runoff and not necessarily seawater rise? So if you could answer that question, I would be, ever so grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. When we talk about any, flood barrier infrastructure type project, we're also going to look at storm drain improvements as part of that. It's going to be a full package. So that would go hand in hand with the analysis. That would go, with those costs. So it might mean that we have to also invest in, a handful of additional pump stations, or maybe we invest in a new linear storm drain system and less pump stations. But that's all part of the process. That doesn't get forgotten.
Okay, that's fantastic. But I mean, I think it's important that Adaptation International have the data about the pump stations that are not working and the volume of water that comes off the Mount Tam watershed. All the major floods are a function of extreme saturation, right, of the floodplain, and really has nothing to do with the seawater rise and a levee. A levee will make that worse, right? It will not make that better. So you know, if we could incorporate that into the plan, because I do not think, and all the data, I put it in my letter, all the data from MIT, Scientific American, says that levees, when you have high runoff, make the situations worse. So we are in a whole different ballgame
It's 7
in terms
o'clock.
of solutions. So I just want to mention that. I do not think that was addressed in the plan, and I have not seen anybody comment on it in a scientific and data-driven way. So that's just my point.
Yeah, and yeah, again, we're taking a step back from some of those details analysis, but we did have an engineering consultant when they prepared their estimate for the tide gate. They took the hydraulic flows from San Clemente Pump Station, and that was one of the driving factors of their costs. So happy to share that memo, but it did go into our thought process. But again, now that we're taking a step back, we can just save that and table that for a discussion further down the road should we embark on this alternatives analysis process.
Okay, great. I'd really like to see how the pump stations do or do not solve this problem, because a lot of us, you know, we're impacted by that, and the indication are they don't work and they do not help solve the problem. The Cove flooded the Cove School flooded a year after it was built with the pump stations in action because they could not handle the runoff, right? And the architects and the whole school were traumatized. They had to pull out the carpet. Those of us who live on Golden Hind, I hate to say it, we were laughing. We knew that would happen. We'd seen it before. So it indicates that people either don't have access to the data or they are ignoring the data, right? Even the architects who came in and built the Cove ignored the available data, right? So that's what I really hope we'll focus on, because those extreme data points are meaningful.
Okay, I'd also like to respond. That Cove School flooding just after it was built and landscaped was in part a result of the architectural plans to make it very ADA accessible. And so there really wasn't good ability for water to run off from that. And then they made the mistake of putting in mulch, which with this heavy downpour caused the drains on the school system to plug, and the water ended up going into the school rather than being able to run off into the drain system that was normally there. So it was really unrelated to that pump station that's across from the Cove School. And in my viewing of that pump station, that it's the one setup with the pump station that's designed to really take the rainwater that accumulates and run that back into the bay against a high tide. All of the other outfalls just have check valves in them so that the bay doesn't come back in. But if it's raining at high tide, it's going to accumulate in the street. And I'd actually seen situations where the tide was high enough that it came between the houses and really over where the Cove School pump station is set up. And the pump was sort of staying up with it. But I mean, that's not what it's designed to do. It's really designed to take out the rainwater that accumulates. It's not really designed to take out the tidal waters that are coming between the houses at high tide. So that's been my observation of that situation over the years since it was installed.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from board members? Next question.
Okay, I'm gonna call on Marta Domizio.
Hello and good evening.
Hi.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Suaku and everybody at the town for agreeing to have a second look at the cap and delaying adoption of the more controversial sections. So thank you for that. That was a big relief. I wanted to address a couple of issues here. Mr. Bundy earlier said that, you know, he thought it was a good idea to plan for the worst case scenario. And I want to say, I respectfully disagree with that. My feeling of what got us into this situation is that the cap was based on, you know, gross overestimations of the flooding potential, you know, both from sea level rise and king tides. And that led to grossly and overtly aggressive solutions. So my suggestion for the future is that the town shifts that and stops insisting on using unlikely data, because using unlikely data will continue to result in unlikely solutions, not, you know, the solutions that best apply to our neighborhoods. So I would really strongly urge you to use data. I mean, during the previous meeting, we presented the case of SFO. If the 66% likelihood data is good enough for SFO, how can it possibly not be good enough for our neighborhood? You know, SFO is a critical infrastructure. You know, really, don't they know what they're doing? The other issue is Mr. Sokol raised the issue of funding and said, you know, funding might or might not be available if we go with the, with the 66% scenario. I would say it's true that looking at funding is hugely important, and I understand the pressure on the town on that aspect, but we also need to consider the cost of these solutions. I mean, building a levee now that, again, most likely we won't need for the next 60 years. Well, that's a $44 million cost, plus maintenance, plus, you know, it came out there is going to be a huge lawsuit from homeowners that will need to be expropriated of land. So that puts us residents, you know, on the dole for huge amounts of money. And the town will have to go out and ask for another measure to pay for all of that. And I would say, I understand grants are hard to get, but you also need to consider the impact, the fiscal impact on, you know, the residents, and the effect of your measures on, you know, the value of our properties. You need to consider that. And no one took that into consideration this time. I have one last point. I would like to know if residents will have a chance to see the edited cap before it is presented to the town, when it will be presented, and when we will be able to see it. Thank you.
So speaking to just a typical project process, so we're trying to provide when we were talking about the hypothetical infrastructure improvement that would provide a barrier for Marina Village, Marina Cove, you know, we're trying to provide a facility that's viewed as a benefit, an improvement. But as part of any typical process, if there is any land rights issues or negative impacts on those fronts, there's a right-of-way process that would, you know, reach out to those neighbors and discuss it. And then also as part of the alternatives analysis process, you know, we're completely open to any, you know, additional, any strategies analysis, different heights, different alignments. If there's a portion of the neighborhood that doesn't want to feature in a certain location, we can look in moving it somewhere else. If, you know, if some people just don't want it in their backyard, we'll look at roadside options. I mean, we're open to everything. So let's just, you know, when the time comes, if we have that conversation, then we just hope that everyone gets involved and participates, and we can come up with the best solution for the overall community.
Thank you. Could you answer the next part of my question? Will we have a chance to review the edited cap, and when is it going to be presented to the town for adoption? Yeah,
so definitely won't be at our upcoming council meeting, which is on the 16th. Possibly sometime in March, possibly later. We have to spend the time to take the comments in, review them thoroughly, see what that makes the updated version look like. There would be a discussion with council at a minimum, going through those in detail, but hard to say. We really just need to see how what the product is that we think is the what could be adopted, and if it's controversial, and then we'll decide, you know, how that gets communicated or broadcast back. But I can't give you the exact answer. I just don't know yet.
But the residents will have an opportunity to comment and view that before it is presented to the town council?
I don't know. That's undecided. We still have to go through that analysis.
I recommend that, given the level of feedback that you got, that you allow us to review, you know, all of residents to review the edited CAP before it is presented to town council. And thank you.
So Marta, I just wanted to make one additional comment. I think you do plan for the worst. You hope for the best, that it's not going to be that bad, but you don't build for the worst. You sort of build as you need, would be my way of looking at it. This should be incremental approaches to sea level rise as we see how the projections pan out going forward. Any
No,
other board members that want to make a comment?
Am I still live?
Yeah.
Okay, so Bob, I agree with you on that, but the plan didn't include anything but a levee. I mean, like Mick said earlier, it didn't have anything, for example, on drains. It didn't have anything to stop erosion of the marsh that has been going on right in front of our home and affects flooding. So the plan only included a feature for the worst case scenario. It didn't include any alternatives. So what we're looking for is, can we please have a plan that includes for, you know, the flooding that we currently have, or that we're more likely to have in the next few decades, instead of, you know, a measure that will be applicable most likely, you know, 60 years from now. You know, the plan was lacking in measures, you know, that will take care of current flooding and near-term flooding.
The plan really did have a good component in relationship to potentially being able to protect the wetlands that are north of San Clemente Creek up towards the Corte Madera Creek. So all of our Corte Madera wetlands are really at risk from all this erosion. And there was a proposal in there to try to harden those outer edges to prevent that erosion that's currently taking place. And that's not in front of homes.
Right, but there was nothing for the wetlands that protect our homes. That's what I mean. There was nothing there to protect, you know, those are the wetlands that are eroding, the ones in front of our homes. They're causing, you know, they're contributing to flooding, and they're contributing to our risk. And there was nothing in the plan to take care of that.
If I may, so we had San Francisco Estuary Institute on our team, and they've probably studied the marsh probably more than any other entity, and they're very nature focused. We also had a 2-year process that was completely open to suggestions from the public and the technical community. And we have yet to hear of an alternative that would address the needs you're saying, but doesn't look like the forms that were in the draft cap. We're still open to those, but I have yet to hear that. So we would love it if you have some ideas you want to share with us, and maybe there's some innovative engineers out there that have some ideas that we haven't heard. It's not that we aren't looking for them. We are. We want the best solution we can possibly find. We just, to date, we haven't heard that magic solution that hits on all those items that you're referencing.
Yeah.
So
I would also like to thank Marta and her neighbors who have really helped protect the community by hardening the outer edge of their properties, which were eroding tremendously from ferry wake as well as storm surges. And, you know, that's what really is protecting your properties at this point, I believe.
Yes. I would say there are plenty of alternatives, but all alternatives need to be based on data. And depending on the projections that we decide to follow, we come up with different alternatives. I would be inclined to follow, you know, projections that are closer to the actual data. I mean, for the past 20 years, we have been measuring sea level rise, and sea level rises have been trending way below the 50 percentile, you know, likelihood data from the study that my husband was mentioning. So again, the levee is great if, you know, you think the sea level rise is going to increase by over 6 feet by the end of the century. But if you consider how the sea level rise has been trending and the more likely scenarios, then the levee doesn't make that much sense. But other options like increasing drainage, taking care, you know, restoring the marsh in front of Mariner Cove and Marina Village, maybe adding riprap in front of seawalls, possibly, you know, supporting homeowners that want to raise their homes or improve their seawalls. All those measures that are less aggressive, you know, could potentially, would take care of a lot of the flooding issues that our neighborhoods are going to experience in the next, you know, several decades. And then you said you're planning on investing another $500,000 to $800,000 in studies. So I would say, let's gather some data and let's see what, you know, other scientists think. But again, based on less overestimated projections, less inflated projections and more realistic ones with better data to base our strategies on. Yeah, we'll get, I mean, the better the data, the better the strategies are.
Thank you. Yeah, we did touch on one concept relating to the idea of weight and loading. I think it was the last time we were presenting here at the flood board for the climate adaptation plan. And so there is some engineering concepts that were applied, and I'm happy to discuss that further with you offline. Sasha, do you have anything to add related to kind of sea level rise projections and those sorts of things in general? I know you got some good knowledge over there in that respect.
Yeah, thanks, RJ, and thanks everybody for this continued conversation. We at Adaptation International just happy to be partnering with the town in this project and exploring the potential impacts of climate change and figuring out solutions to enhance resilience. Just a couple of thoughts maybe to add to the conversation are, I think that the adaptation plan in its draft form didn't do a great job of connecting some of the strategies that are in the town center section that are focused on inland flooding and extreme precipitation, you know, investments in green infrastructure, and maybe, you know, support of different building codes to Marina Village and Mariner Cove. So some of those strategies are explored in the draft cap, but not necessarily applied very well in that particular jurisdiction. The nature-based solutions that were just mentioned are also explored in the CAP. SFEI, the Shoreline Estuary, San Francisco Estuary Institute did a shoreline atlas, which considered different nature-based solutions and their relevance in different parts of the bay. And so the 4 of the most promising solutions are included on pages 72 and 73. But again, maybe the connection to the Marina Village and Mariner Cove area is not strong enough. And then going back to the consideration of the sea level rise scenarios, I think it's important to note that the levee alternatives and elevations were really designed as kind of a test case of feasibility to explore the potential of applying that type of solution, you know, to see if it was even feasible and what the relative costs would be. It wasn't, as RJ said, meant to be a single option plan, but to put options, sort of think about it as tools that go into the town's toolbox that could be used over time. And then I guess the other thing that's been on my mind is thinking about the state guidance for sea level rise, and they use a risk tolerance based approach. So they really encourage jurisdictions to think about what is the tolerance if that elevation of sea level rise is exceeded. So let's say it's the Bay Trail or it's a shoreline park area, and we pick a lower probability, like a higher probability, lower impact scenario, maybe in the lower end of the likely range. And if that projection is exceeded and that park is flooded, it doesn't do necessarily irreparable damage. But for higher investments, more valuable property, residential homes, they encourage jurisdictions to look at the lower likelihood but higher impact scenarios. So in exploring what it would take to protect and preserve those neighborhoods, that's where that elevation came from. Even though it's a lower probability, it's a higher impact type event. And we plan using 100-year or 1% flood events all the time through FEMA, and it's not considered unrealistic. So I think finding that right mix of risk tolerance and thinking about what is the elevation makes sense. And maybe, as RJ says, that really comes into this, deeper engagement of what is the solution that makes sense for those areas.
Thank you for that, Mr. Peterson. And I agree that the CAP had many good solutions. They were all focused in the area of the town center. And for Mariner Village and Mariner Cove, we only had the levee, there was nothing else. So I really look forward to seeing those solutions that were written into the plan for the town center applied to our neighborhoods as well. And again, I'm sorry, but I just don't find it myself or back down on the sea level rise data. I mean, it's not Bay Trails, it's San Francisco Airport that is being built, where their adaptation plan is based on the 3.4 level sea level rise by the end of the century. It's not Bay Trails, it's our airport. And there is also another study that is actually specifically about Corte Madera, and that is called the Corte Madera Bayland study, and the projection there is 36 inches by 2100, and that's a local study. So really, it's not trails. It's the 3 feet of sea level rise by 2100 seems like a much better data point to use for to design future strategies for adaptations for our neighborhood than the 6 feet, over 6 feet that has been used for the CAP. But now I'm going to go and I'll allow other people to talk. I don't want to hog the whole evening. So, but thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And yeah, as mentioned, we're fully open to discuss what model makes the most sense for town of Corte Madera. Some people may be more risk averse than others, and we think that the next process, should that occur, we can have those conversations in more depth. And then before we call on another person, I did want to read one comment from the board, which just for the public record. So in this response to Brian's question about how many people were against some of the concepts in the CAP. And so one, Mark Bellows said, the results I understand were 550 of 600 homes voted against CAP Section 3. Is the board aware that the community is 91.6% against? So I just felt it was appropriate to make that part of the record. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, or we just move to the next caller. Okay. I'm going to ask Roy Wolford to speak, please.
Good evening, all. The major issue I had with the CAP, it was completely devoid of factual scientific information related to the environment, the weather, the climate of Corte Madera. Broad brushstrokes are used, like the California carries the number for the past 5 years of sea level rise of 1 to 2 inches. I'll address that in a little bit. What I'd like to see, and also it didn't talk about the tools for measuring, what are the elevations in the over in Mariner Cove, in the hill areas, where have they been in the past? Where are they now? And then 10 years down the road, it would be nice to look back and see and take elevation measurements and find out what's happening with the vertical motion of the land. Because that has more to do, the vertical motion of the land has more to do with what's going on in Mariner Cove right now than sea level rise. About 95 to 96% of the issue, maybe even higher than that percentage of what we're dealing with in Mariner Cove due to flooding is settlement. That is, I mean, that's without a doubt. Take a look at the the FEMA flood map for Mariner Cove. And you'll notice in the southeast section of Mariner Cove, it is not in the floodplain. Why is that? Because it's on bedrock and bedrock hasn't settled. But a lot of all the other houses, when you move away from that corner, they are in the flood zone. And there was a study done about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Bob, I think you may have been a part of it, that actually looked at solutions for Mariners Cove. And they had a mud map, and RJ was good enough to present that at the workshop. It had some other details on elevation changes. I put together a matrix. Hello. Oh, okay. Yeah, I had another guide or another chart that I put together in an Excel spreadsheet that shows the elevation changes between I think it was 1985 and 2006 for strategic areas all throughout Mariner Cove. So I think that really needs to be recognized. We need to be able to measure. So the reason I'm pushing so hard on the tools is we need to be able to measure where we've been, where we're at, and once we get down the road, where we've been. Because if we're not measuring it, we're not going to be able to manage it. And we need to come up with realistic information. So we're talking elevation, we're talking tidal records, we're talking CO2, rainfall, temperature, and of course the settlement. Now, I presented at the past town council meeting during open time a real terrific interactive website from NOAA, and it indicated that the sea level rise for some time up through 2009 at the Golden Gate, or the entrance of the San Francisco Bay, the rise in sea level was 1.99 millimeters. And in Alameda, it was 0.9, not even 1 millimeter. 1 inch to 2 inches are overstating that rise in sea level by 25 to 50 times. So something's amiss. We need to nail down the specifics of what are happening in our area. Now, the other thing about the report, it didn't use specific data. And when we first started this whole program, Mr. Brown was leading it, he had indicated that there was going to be nothing but scientific data and fact in the program, in the report. And I mean, when I went through and read, it's talking about the weather's getting more severe and that sort of thing. I've looked and studied at the data for rainfall going back to 1880, and I'll guarantee you that the climate and the rainfall was much, much heavier back in the 1880s than it is now. And temperature, it goes up and down, it varies. I have submitted.
Lori, can you wrap it up a little bit so we can get to other people? A lot of this technical things, you and I and RJ, I think, need to look at in more detail.
Well, okay, the last talker took 25, 30 minutes, so I get 5 or 3, I don't know.
I just wanted you to wrap it up, not get.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Why? So we get into this stuff that I think is important, and it's not, huh?
No,
I'm sorry. I was just saying that it was using subjective information rather than hard and fast data. In 1862, there was an arc storm. and Central Valley became an inland sea. I haven't seen anything like that lately, not in the last 140 years. So anyway, I've been cut real short. Sasha, would you please forward all my emails to everyone on the board here that are on the commission so they can read them, and that'll cut my conversation short. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you. Next person is Mr. Vogel. Mr.
Hi.
Vogel.
Yeah, hi, this is Mike Vogel. I live right next door to the pump station on Golden Hind and Ebbtide. So I got a few comments there. But first I want to state, RJ stated that he felt there was a disconnect between the public and the town because we don't understand what a 15-foot wall means. That's not true. We know what your 15-foot height NVDD or whatever that is means. We know the levels of our property, okay? We know that that means an 8-foot wall above our property line. That's not acceptable. So there's not a disconnect. We fully understand what this is and we're against it. Now, to address some of the flooding, which Bob has looked at many a time, when they redid that pump station, the sanitary pump station at Ebbtide and Golden Hind, it used to be a dirt lot when I moved in 96. I can't even remember when they decided to pave it over, but they did take 2 big round tubes that are 8 feet wide and shove them into the ground. That pushed down the ground level there, so much so that it cracked my driveway and the city had to pay to redo my driveway. So there's a depression there. Also, when they redid that, they took 2 channels and dug them right down the property line on either side, down 3 feet. That was their idea of, okay, we're gonna put in a board and then put in some tar over that. That is where the water comes through 90% of the time. So your fix to solve the flooding at Ebbtide and Golden Hind is to, and then when you redid the fence 6 years ago, I told you guys that you should consider this, but you didn't. You actually dug it again. If you build a solid concrete foundation along either side of that pump station, up about 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet, and across the back at 2 feet high, that would allow myself and my neighbor to the south, Mike Burke, to tie in a 2-foot height piece of cement to our foundations. That will solve a ton, probably 90% of the daily flooding that, not even daily, the twice a year flooding that might happen from seawater coming through the low point in the neighborhood. But in 26 years of living here, 24 years of living here, water comes into my garage maybe 4 times a year. 99% of that time, it's from rainwater. It's not from seawater coming forward. It's from that drain not being able to drain. So fix the pump station.
That's 3 minutes.
I don't know how you do that, but fix the pump station. That's it.
Thank you. Next hand raised is Mr. Krajewski.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention that I agree with Bob to the extent that he's saying that we need to plan for the worst. I would like to see a plan that offers alternatives, and I think what Bob was talking about also was possible stepwise, that we don't necessarily have to build a levee next week that is 6 foot higher than what it is currently, but that sometime over the next year, if next years, if we find out in 10 years or 20 years that the sea has risen as some predict, or it's risen less than some predict, that we can decide then whether to raise the further or take various steps during this plan, so that we don't necessarily have to do the end point in the next 10 years for the plan. The other thing I would like to see is a list of what these alternatives are. There has been a lot of talking about alternatives, most of which I don't understand, because if the seawater level rises by 3 feet, it's going to flow over everything that we have at the moment. And raising a house is not going, unless you want to flooding all around the streets, it's not going to take care of this issue. So I would like to see these alternatives spelled out in more detail, both in the plan, but from the people who are saying that there are all these alternatives out there. What are they? The other thing that I would comment on is that the value of the property is, no matter what the wording is or was in the CAP plan, is going to depend on what happens in the future. And if it starts flooding, the value of the property is going to go down no matter what. And real estate agents are going to have to reveal something about the possibility of flooding, no matter what's in the plan or is not in the plan. So I'm concerned about the value of the property going down simply because there's no flood plan in place. And I would say that if the town has to spend $800,000 for redoing some of this and working on it, that's half the cost of one of the houses in Mariner Cove, and it's well worth it at this particular point. So I think it would be more useful if the town were able to communicate all this stuff on an ongoing basis too. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, RJ, I wanted to go back to what Mike Vogel was talking about with that pump station. He's pointed out some of those problems to me when we've discussed it. And the pump station certainly seems to be the lowest spot in Mariner Cove. And that if the catch basin has really sort of sunk, I guess, along with the rest of the property, may be related, as Mike says, to the pump station itself. But it as the lowest spot. If it rains, it's, he's going to get his garage flooded. But at high tides, even if it's not raining, his garage gets flooded. And I think this might be a good spot to really try to look at doing something to protect that area that gets flooded at sort of the lowest high tide, whereas other properties are still dry at that point.
Yeah, so we have 90% designs, as you recall, prepared several years ago about a possible storm drain pump station at that location. It's, I want to say, close to $1.5 million to construct. We don't have environmental compliance yet, and that would, I think, that would take some time. That project also doesn't involve any sort of barrier, which, some people have suggested would be part of that equation. So in all, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar investment that should be discussed in kind of the overall plan for the area. So I think it's part of the conversation, but again, I think we want to have a more longer range plan when we're going to spend that kind of money.
Any other board members that want to comment on anything that's been mentioned lately or up to this point?
Okay, no other hands up other than we have Roger who has spoken already. Chair Bundy, I don't.
Yeah,
or-
let Roger, and then we'll sort of close it, and
Okay.
we do have a rest of the agenda to get to.
Go ahead, Roger.
Hello, thanks for letting me speak again. I just want to, I got to say, I'm a little bit surprised.
I'm not hearing him.
Yeah, perhaps his hand's still raised from his previous comments.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, he's rescinded his hand. So I think that's all the comments on this item.
No, I'm trying to speak. Can you hear me?
Oh, there. Okay. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just saying that I'm a little surprised at the tone of the meeting today. It doesn't really fit in with Manager Cusimano's message to the community today. He seemed to indicate that the cap, including the levy and the floodgates, were now off the table, but I'm not hearing that at all tonight from the flood board. I'm hearing actually quite a lot of resistance to that, and the subtext is that you're actually kind of still committed to the idea of some sort of major infrastructure development in the form of a levy or something along the waterfront here. I'm also surprised that we can't get any commitment that the community is going to be able to look at the revised document before it goes back to the council for voting. Given the tremendous amount of public interest in this and the tremendous amount of negative feedback you've had on the original plan, I find it astonishing you can't just give us a straight answer as to whether the community is going to be able to review that revised document again. And I have to finish up by saying that if you continue in this way, in terms of apparently being still committed to some sort of major infrastructure along the waterfront here, you're going to continue to have opposition from the community. Thank you.
I'll just say, yeah, we are, as our town manager has said, we're going to pull that information from the climate adaptation plan, and that's the full intent here. Again, if the community is interested in pursuing some sort of solution to future projected sea level rise, we're open to an alternative analysis process. But again, we're going to rely on the community to show that support.
Excuse me, can you still hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say it's not our job, excuse me, to find the solution. This whole process started with the overreaching cap plan. It's our paid officials, it's your job, yeah, and our representatives to find these solutions. You can't put it back on the community that we have to find these solutions for you. So yeah, please don't talk like that. Thank you.
From the standpoint of the flood board, I don't think anybody thinks there's any proposal that actually is going to come forward for decades in relationship to a increasing the levee or the seawall or a tide gate. But if the projections of sea level rise over 3 feet are projected at some point, in the middle of this century or towards the end of this century, whoever's around at that time is going to have to look at how we're going to protect this community. But there certainly aren't plans to go forward. These are good concepts that are out there, I believe, if the projections prove to be true. I think it's good to look at the data and see if you know, the sea level rise is being overestimated. I think 20 years from now, we'll have a much better idea, and we won't have built anything at that point, but we have to think about what happens going forward if some of these projections are as bad as projected or even worse.
And Bob, I think that's a good seed that I heard in the meeting tonight. The reason I joined the flood board several years ago was largely because of this issue, because I wanted to be part of this conversation with this town, and having grown up in Mariner Cove. And there was some talk about the settlement issues, and that's true that they're about triple the rate of sea level rise in Mariner Cove. And then the issues of what models we're using and being clear about what model we're using, and perhaps more importantly, what risk level within that model we're using. So I think over the coming weeks and months, the town is going to be taking more input on that issue, on both those issues, and we'll have a more clear understanding of how we're going to go about assessing risk and which models we're going to use. I've also made some suggestions about how to describe sea level itself and some of these elevations in this document. I think if, for the purposes of building a house or a building, you put up story poles so all the neighbors can see what it's going to look like if you build something. And I think the ability to put up a story pole with sea level elevations on it in various places in town along the shoreline would make it a lot easier for people to understand what it would mean if there were a levee at a certain elevation. So I totally understand all the comments about home values and usage of homes. And I think we can't have a real conversation about this until we're all talking about the same thing as far as settlement and sea level projections. And once we get there and we're in agreement that these are the right models, it'll be much easier to have a conversation about not only what to do, but when to do it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Roy brought up is that we really need to get some good data on what has happened with subsidence. I think it did happen from the core borings that were taken a number of years ago. Estimated that the settlement was much greater in the early years as the weight was put on the bay mud. But a number of neighbors that are on the water really do not seem to think that the settlement has been that great. So I would really want to get some good data on what's been happening over the last 20 years in regard to that. I don't know if we'd have to get new test borings again, but just the actual hard data on what elevations from 20, 30 years ago and now would be helpful to tell if we need to protect from flooding due to subsidence or sea level rise or both.
Yeah, and there would definitely be a whole range of additional engineering tests and studies that would be part of a future process. So definitely the more data, the better, the more informed decisions we can make. It looks like we're getting close to wrapping up. I wanted to see if Sasha had anything else to add about kind of as we start closing this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, RJ, and thanks for the good discussion with the community members and all the board members. It feels like it's a good next step in the process to have these conversations. And I will just echo the thoughts about monitoring, and one of the hallmarks of resilience is being flexible and monitoring and looking for, the signals as conditions change. And one of the great unknowns is the groundwater issue. And SFEI has a grant from the state to look at kind of how rising sea levels is and will continue to affect groundwaters throughout the region. And that may be another area, Chairman, where it would make sense to consider implementing monitoring in those neighborhoods to look at how groundwater is changing over time. And these are complicated issues, and it takes time to work through everything. And I think the town is moving forward in those conversations in a really robust way with the community members now truly engaged.
Thank you. So I think we've got another agenda to get to, and I really would like to move on. And this obviously is going to continue into the future, and nothing is on the works as far as anything happening. And the community is certainly now engaged and will have a key role to play in making plans going forward and looking at solutions.
Great, thank you. So the next item, I believe, is 2021 Flood Control Board meeting schedule.
All right, let me pull up the PowerPoint real quick. Okay, so we just have a few quick updates other than the CAP to talk about. So this is the 2021 Flood Control Board schedule. As always, it's every other month.
So this coincides with the standard expected schedule. We just figured since it's the first meeting of the year, good chance to make sure there's not any conflicts that we aren't aware of. And I don't know that this needs a formal vote, but if you see any issues with any of these dates, please let us know.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's get through this. So we're just gonna check back in about check valve maintenance. I know we had talked about it last August, but it's been quite a bit of time. So just wanted to give an update. So the last time we had talked about installing a new check valve at 167 Goldenheim Passage due to tidal influence in the storm system there. We ordered the check valve that you see on the left. It's a Tide Flex Ultra Flex Checkmate check valve. And it goes inside the culvert that outfalls into San Clemente Creek. And unfortunately, due to COVID, everything is back ordered. So it's supposed to arrive in the next week or two, and we'll be installing it at that time. Second item, our crews inspected all the check valves and floodgates around town, and they did find a faulty one at 10 Channel Drive. You can see in the bottom left picture, it's leaking there. And that was pretty low tide. So they're planning to fix that the next chance they get. They have to wait for a really low tide for that. And then, you know, through this whole process, at least I've realized that our tracking of check valves could definitely be improved. So when we go out to do the storm drain master plan, I think we're gonna improve our GIS tracking of these facilities, which should make it easier to keep track of them and maintain them.
Chris, could I ask why you need a very low tide to check the 10 channel tide check valve?
Yeah, so the outfall of that pipe is only at, you know, is at like 3 feet. So it's really low. So even some low tides are above that. And whenever this check valve is unusual in that it's like a box inside a catch basin. And so they have to like reseal the edges of it. And so it has to be empty to do that. So they have to wait until the tide's below the outfall.
So this check valve is at the outfall rather than at the street level.
It's at the pipe going out to the outfall is basically flat, but it's the check valve is actually is at the street inside the box there.
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised because channel is relatively high in elevation. I've only seen water, you know, cooling up there at extremely high tides.
Yeah, we discovered this when we were actually working on the sewer project, but this system drains Baja Court and part of Channel, and it actually is fairly deep compared to the street level. So I think that's why the outfall is so low. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, moving on. So we wanted to give a just brief presentation on our plan for our 2021 capital improvement project list. So here's a list of our planned projects right now, and the ones in bold involve storm-related improvements. I'll just focus on those ones for the flood board. But so the 2021 road rehab projects, we're going to be repaving several roads that are listed there. And as part of paving, we always look at drainage. And I believe we're making some major improvements to Flying Cloud and Pacific Queen. And as well as Marina Village, we're going to be trying to tackle some of the gutter ponding that didn't get fixed in the when they installed the great drains along the streets there. So that's planned for this summer. And then down below, we've got the storm system master plan request for proposals that we're planning to roll out in the next few months. The small trash capture device multi-jurisdictional project. So just to give a little background on that, in the updated NPDES permit, we're going to, all cities, towns, counties are going to be required to capture trash in the storm systems fully by 2030. And so, to get a jump start on this, McStop has received an EPA grant to fund some of these trash capture devices. And so we're trying to, join several other cities and receiving some of that EPA grant money to install a few just as kind of a test case and see how the maintenance goes and that sort of thing. So we're working on that project this year. Lucky Drive flood protection project. We haven't done much design on that yet, but we are hoping to team up with the county and try and apply for a FEMA grant just to get the ball rolling on that. So that's planned in the next few months as well. And then the last one is the San Clemente stormwater pump station repair. We just recently found a sinkhole above the 54-inch outfall pipe for that pump station. So there's clearly a leak or a hole in the outfall pipe that's causing soil to enter the pipe and creating a sinkhole there. And actually the next slide goes into that a little bit. There's a picture of it on the left, but it doesn't seem to be, there isn't an immediate danger, and the sinkhole is not, it's like next to the road, but there's nothing critical nearby. So we're planning to initiate a small construction project to investigate it in a few months after, the rain subsides a bit. And so.
Chris, is this the manifold that was replaced a few years ago or within the last 5 or 6 years?
Yep. Yeah. So sounds like you're familiar, Bob. It's maybe a similar, maybe possibly in the same location. I think that was intended to be a Band-Aid repair. And so it has probably, reached its point at which the Band-Aid is no longer good. We want to do a proper fix, which likely involves getting a good look at the pipe, getting really accurate measurements, ordering a custom fitting custom pipe segment that's going to probably be a long lead item, and fix it proper. Also look at the corrosion on the manifold itself and possibly look at an active cathodic protection device for that manifold. So it's a bigger effort, and one that given it can wait, it's probably safer to wait given the reliance on the San Clemente pump station.
Yeah, I had recalled that that was a fairly major repair that I thought was due to poor early design when that was installed. As I remember, I thought Dave Bracken telling me that it was never quite right, and they had to really replace that whole thing because there was a big excavation and it went on for a period of time. But I don't remember all of the details of that.
Yeah, we did hire the same contractor, so it's Gelati Brothers. So they luckily have that knowledge from, 5 to 7 years ago that they can apply, and that's been the message. They said it was a short-term repair that apparently has served its purpose, but this time around we want to fix it proper for decades. So it's be a little more involved. Custom pipe fittings, active corrosion protection if needed. But yeah, we want to get it done right this time.
Yeah, I was thinking it was a lot of money, close to $1 million last time, but maybe I'm mixing that up with the one at Madera del Presidio, which was also a major replacement.
I just want to jump in. I think from what I heard, the previous repair, which was 2016, there was a sinkhole out in the road, and that was where the repair was on Madera del Presidio. So I think this may be a different issue because they did a video in 2016, which I reviewed, and the problem here seems to be where the concrete pipe meets up with the steel pipe that comes out of the pump station. So we may be talking about two different things, but we'll have to see once we, excavate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Chris, if we can go back one slide to the CIP list.
Sure.
So the purpose today was really just to give an intro on some of the projects, related to your efforts on the flood board. Also to, give Chris and the other engineers a pat on the back for the good work they're doing, but also shed a little bit of light on just our work plan in general. It's been at a pretty heavy level now for a couple years, and the last year in particular with COVID and everything was pretty tough on staff, and I think I need to do a better job of having discussions with the various boards about priorities, so I don't burn out Chris and others, because they're always positive and they always say that they're fine, but I know it's at times pretty stressful, and so just want to be put that a little bit more on the forefront as we work on our work plans. But whether it be flood board or BPAC or the community, this town has so many great ideas, and the unfortunate reality is staff can't always keep up with the number of great ideas that are generated. So sometimes those ideas may have to go on a list and just get deferred for a period of time before we can actively pursue them. But we still want the good ideas. We just have to kind of set expectations about how quickly we might be able to deliver some of these.
No, just asking about one small project that has somewhere been on the list, but never was gotten to. Every time I run into Mr. Dunn at Nugget, he mentions, are we ever going to get around to fixing the drainage problem at, I think it's 25 El Camino, where he lives. I've gone by and seen that ponding and backing up into almost his garage. And it's, as I've looked at it, it seems like there was a failure of the drainage that's there. It's not just a ponding problem, but I know it's been looked at in the past, but is there any plan to give him some relief and get to that at some point?
Yeah, we do have some design analysis, including in, it's already under contract as part of our upcoming, we have the same consultant doing our sewer rehab design, as well as assisting with some of our storm drain improvements in that area. So the sewer rehab project is scheduled for this summer, with the road project and storm drain project following the following year. And so hopefully as part of that second project, we'll be able to address that concern.
Great. He'll be ecstatic.
Yeah, so that likely will be 2022.
Okay. Any questions from any of the board members on these capital improvement projects?
Just one question. Did we get, did we already receive a copy of this electronically?
We're happy to distribute one. We'll
Okay.
also probably be updating it. We kind of had to, we're a little behind on where we'd like to be from a workload planning standpoint. The last few months are usually where we do the bulk of our planning and organization, and just given the overflow from last summer's construction and amongst these other plans, such as the cap and other things, we're a little behind at the moment. So I think we'll probably put this on the agenda on the next one and have a more thorough discussion. But in the meantime, we can get you a draft list.
Okay, thanks.
One final thought on the Flying Cloud and Pacific Queen repaving, where you're hoping that's going to also improve some of the drainage. Are there going to need to be some trees taken out where the root systems have really disrupted the curb and sidewalks?
It's possible. We are still waiting to receive our first design submittal of the plan, but I know they're planning to replace a lot of the curb and gutter. And so if it's been uplifted by trees, then really the only way usually is to cut the roots, which in turn makes you have to take the tree out. So we'll see, how, if any, or how many trees we'll have to take out soon. And we usually contact the homeowners and let them know that well ahead of time. Yeah,
these are these liquid amber trees that were put in Mariner Cove, and just really the wrong street tree to put in. They played havoc with sidewalks, curbs, and streets.
Yeah, definitely. And those, we have the same problem all over Marin. They plant those everywhere. So.
Okay, any final comments? I don't have the agenda in front of me. Was there another item on the agenda?
I think we glossed over one, just approving the action minutes from the prior meeting. And then the only other item would be just any future items for discussion.
Is there a move to approve the minutes from the last meeting that were sent out?
I'll move to approve it.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Minutes approved. And any future agenda items that we'd like to have on there? Although after RJ talked about trying to not overload the staff, we be careful what you ask for.
Well, it's going to be a while before the next meeting, but if you do decide, as some of the people asking about the cap asked, how the review is going to go of the updated cap, if it's going to go out to the public or it's going to go straight to the town council, it'd be great if we could hear about that.
Yeah. So I because we're an advisory board, I handled the questions and the response to the members of the public that were calling in differently than would have been handled in a town council or planning commission or other type of meeting, just to allow people to feel they've really been heard and try to answer in real time as much as possible. Again, I want to reiterate that I think the climate adaptive plan and the consultants that were involved in it really were first rate. We got a lot of information. We've got a lot of projected proposals. It was too bad that we didn't have, more of the town involved in it early to bring up some of the issues that they were talking about and understand some of the issues. And it gets back to that, old adage that a number of us have talked about, is that you almost do have to go door to door and engage people, or at least deliver a personal letter to those that are most impacted, the individuals that were, on the water. And I think we're hearing from people that are unhappy, or think there should be another alternative, or think it's really not necessary. And that a lot of the residents that were involved in this process all along are not really engaged at this point, that, they had understood the issue and signed off on it, or, knew that this was something that was going to come back later. So I think it was great that RJ sort of shepherded this whole thing, through the process to get it to this point, even if, we've got a lot of the residents that are unhappy with it.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I echo some of that, and that I think it's, whether they showed up late or on time, it's good that they made it eventually. So again, we want a community project, and so hopefully that's through a next, if we proceed with the next round, hopefully everyone will be fully engaged in that next step.
Yep, I think you've got their attention. Okay, any final comments from board members? Thanks again, RJ. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks,
Good
RJ.
work.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
go over Roy's data that he sent to me and see if I can respond to him on that. Take care.